Hello, everyone. This is the last episode of On Orbit podcast before the big Satellite 2025 conference in Washington, D.C., taking place March 10th through March 13th at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center. This episode of On Orbit features Sarah Cruddas, our special guest MC for the event. And if you want more information on how to register and attend Satellite 2025, visit www.satshow.com. That's www.satshow.com. More than 275 speakers from all over the world, thought leaders in space and satellite technology are gathering in Washington, D.C. to talk to us about the future of business and growth in space. That is Monday, March 10th through Thursday, March 13th. Visit satshow.com to check out more information about our event. And now on to our episode.
In this week's episode, I interview space journalist and TV personality Sarah Cruddas, who is joining Satellite this year as a guest host. Sarah has had an exciting career in space journalism and communications, from being a weather presenter and science correspondent to a TV personality, industry consultant, and author. She's extremely passionate about how space technology can make life better on Earth and wants to see the industry get out of its bubble and do a better job of communicating why space technology matters. Sarah tells the story of how she covered the final Space Shuttle launch and landing in 2011 using a satellite dish to send signal back to the BBC, and how she took a scientific look at reports of alien activity and UFOs when she worked on 2 different TV shows. We also talk about what she's looking forward to at Satellite, from the keynotes, GovMilSpace program, and networking opportunities to connect with folks in the industry. Speaking of networking, Via Satellite is hosting a happy hour in our booth on the exhibit hall floor on Wednesday, March 12th at 4 p.m. So please stop by and say hi. I'd love to connect with our listeners in person. I'm Rachel Jewett, and you're listening to On Orbit, the podcast that asks, what's our future in space? Hi, Sarah. Welcome to On Orbit.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So you are getting ready to guest host at Satellite in DC shortly. So I wanted to have you on the podcast and give our listeners a chance to get to know you better. And, you've had a really exciting career in space communication. So I wanted to hear more about that.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, it's actually my first ever time attending Satellite. I was due to first come in 2020. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the US, even though I live here. And because of an event we might have heard of in 2020 called COVID, I wasn't able to attend. So it is my first time. And I'm sure out of the whole 14,000 attendees, there's other people who are attending for the first time. So I'm super excited to meet new people, to meet familiar faces, and just really be part of this flagship conference. And one of the things I love most about this is the kind of mission behind it, driving business and also inspiring purpose. And I'm hoping it'll be an inspiring week, best part of a week. With some great people, leaders within the industry.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really cool to have you there to kind of mix it up. It's something really different for Satellite to have a guest host. So I think that's going to be awesome. And 2020, that was my first Satellite. That was a crazy one.
Yeah, I was due to come until about a week beforehand. I'm genuinely so excited, and it feels privileged to be. I think I'm your first guest host. Maybe I'm not, but I am.
At least in the past, 5-6 years that I can, for sure, in the last 5-6 years, and I don't think they've done it before that.
Yeah, no, I'm excited, and I think it's a huge honor and just an exciting time for the space industry as well. I feel like I'm overusing that word exciting, but even in the last few years, in the last 5 years since 2020, so much has changed within the space industry, within the satellite industry, not just in terms of like what we're doing and what we're sending up, but also the wide-ranging benefits for life back here on Earth and industries back here on Earth and businesses back here on Earth. So it's going to be a great conference.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we've really seen commercial space explode in the last 5 years. There's been so much more activity. New companies that were startups 5 years ago are now like publicly traded, big operating companies. So yeah.
There's always this it's a bad analogy, but it's what we're doing it's not a bad analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but we almost need to think of what we're doing in space is no different to what humans have done before. Take, for example, exploration. Governments tend to go first. It's government funded missions, and then private industry follows. So the only thing really different with space is the playing field, in that it is space, but it's becoming more and more mainstream. And yeah, it's not just all these new companies, it's also companies that aren't traditional, space companies from a whole range of industries, from like anything from a advertising agency to farming. And, I'm excited about your panel on, smart farming for the future. But so many industries are now having to think about space strategies. And that's what I think makes this year's satellite even more exciting and even more relevant and important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I will. For our listeners, please come watch me on the agriculture panel on Wednesday morning. I've been covering the John Deere, what they've been doing with satellite communications, and then some other agriculture companies as well. So I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm interested for that one because I remember this must have been about 10 years ago with the BBC. I made a radio show for BBC Radio 4 about farming in space, and to see kind of like it now move on 10 years forward, it's just really exciting because we just don't think of these traditional industries. But, space is more than just a place to go. It's a place to do business. And something like, your panel, when I was looking through the program and looking at things I was most excited about, it really stood out to me because it's just that kind of like non-traditional pathway and the benefit you see from satellite data, from space exploration, really benefiting a multitude of industries here on Earth.
On Earth, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So were you originally like, I want to be a space journalist? What was your path to space communications?
Well, I have the most probably cliche path if you were to ask a kid. I can't remember a time when space hadn't been my passion. One of my first memories is of looking up at the moon at the night sky. I grew up in a poor part of the north of England in the UK, but I just love space. I just loved astronomy. I won a science competition in the UK to go out to Huntsville, Alabama, and represent the UK at NASA's space camp. They run an international space camp every year. So I had that. I then studied physics with astrophysics at university. As a little kid, I either wanted to have a PhD in cosmology or become an astronaut. And obviously, being originally from the UK, it's a slightly harder path. But then when I was at university, I went traveling around Latin America, and I saw kind of like the world in a different way. I saw there's poverty all over the world, but I saw a level of poverty I hadn't seen before. And it made me want to tell stories. And I was like, maybe I don't want to do a PhD. Maybe I want to tell stories. And I started while still at university, at the University of Leicester, which is in central UK, great space department, great space research lab there as well. But I started working in my final year answering phones, unpaid and then paid for the BBC for a local radio station. And then kind of like the rest, as they say, is history. I then did a master's in journalism. So I dropped all plans to do a PhD. I did a master's in journalism instead, and then started working in local radio, then as a weather presenter with the BBC. And then I started doing science stories again, because that love for space kind of never left me. I remember interviewing the British-American astronaut, because many Brits become Americans to follow their dreams of space. I'm one of those. And there was a British-American astronaut called Piers Seller, who had grown up in the UK, become an American, and then become a NASA astronaut. And I remember interviewing him after it was one of the last space shuttle missions, and interviewing him and just being like, I want to go back to space. And then shortly after that, I covered the final space shuttle launch and landing. And then I left the BBC to follow my dreams of space, and working everything from within the space industry and the communications and marketing side to hosting TV shows about space, writing books about space, and just really using, I guess, my skills of speaking geek, so to speak, understanding the space industry, but also understanding how to speak non-geeks, to speak average Joe, I guess, and communicate why what we're doing matters, why it's shaping our future, and why a whole range of industries, everything from investors through to John Deere, for example, should be listening to what's going on in space. And then, that's it. That's a long story short, I hope.
So you decided, so you were at the BBC and you were like, I'm going to go and basically have your own business of space communications and hosting TV. You've written a couple of books also?
Yeah, so I've written 5.5 books. I contribute to another book. No big deal. I don't know whether I'd like to do another book. They are a long slog, particularly adults nonfiction. But I've written 3 children's books about space. One of them, the space race, I'm particularly proud of. I actually launched that into space or to the edge of space using a weather balloon, and had a forward by Space Shuttle Commander Eileen Collins. I then wrote an adults book called Look Up, which Apollo 11 astronaut Michael Collins wrote the forward for, which is a huge honor. And then I wrote a book with Aseline called Moon Paradise, with another cool forward from Apollo 16 astronaut Charlie Duke, looking at art and space and art in the moon, and kind of, so it's a completely different, these Aseline books are these giant coffee table books with amazing images, and I did the words for it as a collaboration, and just a real different kind of like shift on using space. And for a brand like Aseline, which focus on high-end clientele and elite destinations, to talk about exploring space was a real exciting pivot and opportunity for both of us. So 5 books, and then I co-wrote another book, it's almost like taking every opportunity or trying to create as many opportunities to try and tell stories about space and inspire people from all walks of life about why what we're doing matters. It doesn't matter whether you're 6 or 66. Space brings meaning to your life, and it also doesn't matter whether you're an investor or a Fortune 500 company. There's still a lot of STEM illiteracy when it comes to the space industry. So that's the other half of what I do, is kind of like helping organizations, helping space startups, helping deep tech startups explain what they're doing, get their story straight, is what the name of my current project at the moment, to explain what you're doing and why it matters. Because sometimes within the space industry, we live in this bubble and we assume everyone knows and everyone understands. I know this from when I was working solidly in the media, that it doesn't work that way. There is a STEM illiteracy problem, and the way to solve it and to communicate better is to get your story straight, and to communicate that better.
So is that an initiative for like the industry to be able to tell its story better?
Yeah, so Get Your Story Straight is a new project I've set up. Most of my work has always been in the media, and I work across both the media and kind of like the space industry and tech industry. But Get Your Stories Straight is you can go to getyourstorystraight.org. It's a new project I've set up to help space industry and deep tech and other technology startups communicate what they're doing better, because I understand it. If you're an engineer or a scientist listening to this, like you see communication as a soft skill, but we know within space startups, for example, that one of the silent killers of space startups is poor communication. So if we can communicate better, if we can explain what we're doing better, if we can explain value to shareholders, value to taxpayers about why what we're doing, why what you're doing matters, it helps everyone. It helps the industry and it helps businesses grow.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. I mean, there are so many times when I'm looking at press releases to see what makes sense to cover for via satellite, and I read it and I'm like, I don't even think they know what they're trying to say.
Yep.
Or maybe they do know, but they can't communicate it. So I really think the space industry, maybe it's getting better, but it does need a lot of help with communicating what it's doing. For, some of the audiences it's like, is it important for the public or is it important for investors, like the different layers of audience? But yeah, it's definitely something that the space industry struggles with.
And I think also as well, and this goes across the board with communications, one of the strongest, and I like to talk, as you can already tell, I'm talking on the podcast, but one of the most important skills, I guess, as a journalist as well, and you'll know this, Rachel, is just listening. And I think sometimes in the space industry, we need to remember that we need to listen. We need to listen to what investors want to hear instead of telling them what to hear. We need to listen to what journalists want to hear. We need to look and listen to what journalists and reporters put out so we can help them write the best stories and understand what we do. And I think if we change the way we frame how we communicate in the space industry to listening instead of just dictating and almost like an assumed knowledge, we'll get better results. And why don't you want to succeed? Why don't you want to listen to where you're going wrong and find ways to succeed? So it's an exciting time for space, and I get it. Like even 10 years ago when I really first started working in the commercial space industry, there was a lot of, I guess it was it was a lot of engineers just starting up companies, and then they kind of got married with business people, and now the next thing is to get marketing and communication people and to grow those skills in media. So it's coming along, but it is kind of the next natural step for the evolution of the industry.
Yeah, I agree that there's definitely room for improvement there. So on the other side of communications, in terms of communicating with the public, you have a pretty popular Instagram account where you're breaking down space and science topics. How do you see your goal with with your Instagram account?
I'm going to be completely honest. I have a love-hate relationship with social media.
Okay, yeah.
I started in TV. So my first job at 23 was on TV with the BBC as a presenter, and so I've always come up through traditional media. So I'm kind of like, wow, what is this now, and why do I have to put a phone in front of my face, and why do I? So I see this more in value in kind of like inspiring people. And I think you've got to remember who your audience is. If you're a large company, do you really need to be making Instagram posts about your latest thing? Is it actually going to benefit you? I don't know. But, it's about, but if it's about inspiring and recruiting, we know we've got a recruiting problem in the space industry, then explaining all the different jobs in the industry or talking about the latest facts or kind of like what's going on within the space industry and the latest news is going to work. So it's really about, my kind of like journey with social media is kind of like when there is value in telling a story, when there is value in communicating both to me and my business and what I do, but also to the general public of just like giving back. That's when I think there's value in telling a story. And you really have to assess it on a kind of like per story basis when you make content for social media. But yeah, I'm a reluctant user of social media. I'm a very private person. I don't put anything on my personal out there. And it's just kind of like, there's an oversaturation of media as well. And the media industry is shifting a lot. So that's something that we're seeing with social media. And just to pivot from that ever so slightly, if you don't mind, one of the things I'm kind of excited about with satellite as well is as a journalist and part of the journalism that I've done is involve reporting in conflict zones, reporting in Central Africa, reporting in places I was probably foolish to go to, is the advent of kind of like satellite journalism and how satellite data, satellite imaging can actually transform traditional journalism. And journalism, as we all know listening to this, has a problem at the moment. And that problem is terms like fake news, and people don't trust the news and trust the media. But satellite, if you're a TV rolling news channel, for example, and a story breaks, the first thing, rule 101, straight out of journalism school, is story breaks, you go to a map because you've got no other images to show. Right. But now we can go to a satellite image to tell a story. For example, with the Los Angeles fires, they were able to use, I think it was Maxar, our technology, to actually show the impacts of the fires in areas in near real time. So just to pivot away from social media back to traditional media, which I guess has been my bread and butter for a lot of my career, we're going to see the impact of journalism and hopefully an increase in trust and in also safety, because instead of going to these dangerous zones, instead of sending reporters to dangerous parts of the world, you can now utilize satellite data. There was a Pulitzer Prize that was won for a New York Times, I believe it was New York Times report in Syria into hospital bombing using satellite journalism. So social media is one avenue of what I do, but like my first love is always going to be traditional journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Maxar has done an amazing job with their news bureau in disseminating that information. Yep. And I feel like it's underpinned so much amazing reporting about what's actually happening in conflict zones.
And hopefully trust as well, because if you see the images, you're not relying on an interview or relying on a reporter risking their life on the ground, but you've got these images, and it's just transforming what's happening within the media industry, and it's going to continue to do that. And that's what I kind of like am most excited about with satellite, is that, all these non-traditional space industries are now benefiting from satellite technology.
Yeah. And I hope you don't mind me asking, but I know, you mentioned the wildfires in LA, and I know that you were impacted by that. So can you talk to me about how you were impacted and what has that been like for you?
I guess I'm one of the lucky ones, because where I live is still standing. I live near the Eaton fire. So I saw the fire burning the night before I had to evacuate. And I will be finally home fully by the end of this week. But it's one of those things. It's happened. LA is a fantastic city. It's a complex city. It's a crazy city. But the whole community, the broader community of Los Angeles I've lived here for 3.5 years now, but it's come together, and it makes you feel, the fires are devastating to wildlife, to people, to, and actually I would urge anyone listening to this, if they're able to donate, please do. One place that I've been urging people to go to is Pasadena Humane Society, who are rescuing people's pets and animals impacted by the fire. There's also a load of other organizations, but I always think it's best just to mention one. But like, it's not been ideal, but you know, we go through these things, and I feel fortunate compared to so many others who've lost everything. But like, I think we need to remember this year that, and every year, I guess, because let's be honest, no year is disaster free, that there are people in the space community who have been, I think it was something like over 100, perhaps 150 JPL employees lost their homes, which is just crazy. But yeah, it's been an interesting start of the year, but I just mostly feel grateful.
Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to you and to the people, especially the people that have lost their homes in that situation. And I think they're going to be talking about that at Satellite also, and how satellite technology can play a bigger role. I know that it does, but there are a number of constellations in the works that are looking at how can satellite deliver faster, more tactical, like more useful imagery in those situations. So.
And then, that's another thing which is hugely exciting. We need to almost we think of space as being like astronauts or going to Mars or exploring other worlds. And that's what got me excited. I'm sure it's what got you excited in space, Rachel, I'm guessing. But space is so much more than that. It's about Earth. The real bread and butter is about Earth, and it's about improving disaster relief. It's about improving forest deforestation or farming, or safety, or connecting parts of the world which didn't have access to connectivity. And I mean, it's been a hard year for Los Angeles so far, but it's an exciting time in terms of how technology will find a way to combat the challenges we are facing, and satellite technology, satellite imagery, and different types of imagery in particular are one of those forms of technology which will help us adapt to a changing environment that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. On a little bit lighter side, I wanted to ask you about some of the TV shows you've been a part of, Contact, about whether aliens have made contact, and UFO conspiracies. So do you lean on the skeptical side, or did you find some of those things to be really credible when you were working on those TV shows?
So Contact was looking at people, everything from like Nimitz, which was the US aircraft carrier that pilots, I think it was released by the images or videos were released by the Pentagon 5-6 years ago now, but looking at whether any of these UAP, unidentified kind of like aerial phenomena, were actually serious and credible or not. So I worked with a team of investigations, ex-military personnel, and I was I was the only woman on a Discovery show like that, traveling around the world, being in the Mexico jungle, being in, caving and doing all this other crazy stuff. And that was looking at whether there's any credibility behind those claims. And I'm going to say it is most of the time, it's not aliens. Most of the time, it's not. But, I'm not here saying, but sometimes we need to explore, and we need to understand we know so little about our universe and so little about our own planet. And there are stuff that we can't explain. It doesn't mean the answer's aliens. And if we have all these claims, so to speak, it's almost like an embarrassment of riches, because it dilutes things that cannot be explained. But it's about taking a more kind of like serious and scientific look at whether there is any credibility behind any of these claims. A lot of them, 99.99% of them, could be written off. But that was the same. That was a US TV show, Contact, which aired in 2019, and then my other show, which aired in 2022. I feel like the title's slightly misleading, because I've worked with SETI for a long time. I was involved in the redesign of their logo, probably the best part of 10 years ago as well. And that show involved SETI, the UFO conspiracy theories, and kind of like looking at everything from a Mau, which is kind of this like foreign object within our own solar system that was discovered, and whether that is a rock or whether it could be, as Avi Loeb said at the time, an alien spaceship. Realities we'll never ever know. One day the answer might be aliens, but it was more again about taking a kind of like analytical and scientific approach to is there any credibility behind these sightings? And then, to be brutally honest, again, going back to a STEM literacy problem within the media, sometimes the shows which catch the public's attentions, where you have the opportunity to talk about science, are the ones which have headlines that you might not agree with. But sometimes you have to take those opportunities to enable STEM literacy, to put out a scientific way of thinking and explain why these things aren't correct, and why there's still so much uncertainty. Within the next 30, 40 years, we might know whether we're alone or not. It's most likely microbial life elsewhere within our solar system, but then you can extrapolate that out. But by taking a role to inform the public, it comes back to STEM, trying to improve STEM literacy and to inspire people more about space exploration and why what we're doing matters, and kind of like why we need to ignore most things, but why we need to like pay attention to critical thinking and scientific methods and stuff like that. So those are two really cool projects I worked on in terms of just kind of like inspiring people about what else might be out there, but honestly giving a more realistic response.
Okay, yeah. So it's like it might have kind of a sensational title, but really it's
this isn't ancient aliens. No, it's I always think about it, and I'm sure you feel like this as a journalist, like you don't write the headlines for the articles you write the piece, and then a headline expert writes the headline and you're like, oh damn, does that even match what I'm trying to say? But it's about just kind of like speaking to people and sorting out the diamond from the rough, so to speak. And I think there's a big difference from people may see things that they can't explain, but it doesn't mean they can jump to conclusions and say this is aliens. The reality is there's a lot that can be explained, and the stuff that can't be explained, we just don't know the answer yet.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that was great. I'm just curious. Whatever you mentioned covering the last space shuttle launch. Tell me about some of your favorite space stories that you've covered.
See, that's probably one of my first ones because I was still a weather presenter with the BBC, and I took leave from the BBC and went out to Florida with a satellite kit and covered the story back to the BBC, covering the final space shuttle launch and landing. So sat in being from England originally, being in the Florida weather is a unique experience for someone who's not used to it in July. So being covered in mosquito bites and sat in a swamp, like a radio dish at the landing site. But that was, I think for me, because it was the end of kind of like the space era that I'd grown up with, the space shuttle era, and this, the idea that that's how human beings get to space. That's how ideas and science and experiments get to space. And it was quite depressing for a time after. I remember going back to the Cocoa Beach Space Coast area 2 years later in 2013, and it's kind of desolate, and it didn't feel the same. And this is an area of America which has got so much incredible space history, from like the Mercury 7 astronauts first being there, and then the Apollo landing, Apollo missions, and all this amazing stuff. But then what I saw over the years after, as I started returning and working more on the Space Coast, is just that really was a pivot point, the final space shuttle launch and landing, because then it then marked the beginning of this new era in space exploration in terms of like private industry and businesses really disrupting the way that things are done in space, and opening up access to space for many, many more people, not just for many more humans to go into space, but for many more ideas, experiments and businesses. And that's really what's taken us to the era we live in today, where space benefits us even more, and there's more opportunities for business, there's more opportunity for science, more opportunity for technology coming from this new commercial area of space exploration.
So what I heard from the beginning of that is that you have on the ground satellite news gathering experience of using the dish yourself to transmit. That's amazing.
I know, this was 2011, and I remember I had this big giant dish which I had to fly out for me. You have to have a carnet with it, and then you I remember having, and this is on the by the space shuttle landing kind of facility at KSC. I remember having to like put cones around it, sat in a deck chair in a swamp, because that's the only way I could get the satellite signal to broadcast for BBC Radio for the final space.
Oh my gosh.
It's crazy how much technology's evolved now. The fact that you and I are doing this in Zoom, I'm in Los Angeles, you're in, the East Coast, and it's crazy how much, like, I guess it's 13 and a half years ago now, but it's crazy how much like satellite technology, communications technology has evolved, that having covered subsequent launches, I don't have to ferry a satellite dish to broadcast back to organizations. So yeah, I do have literal first-hand satellite experience.
Yes, I love that. What a great story.
But yeah, the space shuttle definitely, of all the things I've reported on, I think the space shuttle, the final space shuttle launch and landing, will always be special, because it was also kind of like the motivation I had to to leave what I was doing, to leave the BBC, to eventually emigrate to America to follow my dreams of space. And that was kind of like the catalyst for me, because I got to see firsthand the space program, which is, maybe in America you might take it for granted because this is a spacefaring nation and always has been a leader and will continue to be a leader in space. But for those outside, that is a huge deal to even be able to come here and to be a part of that. So that for me was without a doubt the most exciting thing I've ever covered. There's been lots of other cool stuff, but for me, that was the most pivotal.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially with your perspective of being from the UK. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
So I know that you've traveled really all over the world for your work. Tell me about what has been some of your favorite destinations for work, and then also for fun or not for work.
Okay, it's such a hard question to answer. I'm always going to be fond of South America because that's what first inspired my love of storytelling.
Yeah.
Brazil, Bolivia, Uruguay, Argentina, which is really foolish. I was like 19, 20, wandering around South America. But so that's always going to be a passionate place or region of the world for me. Central Africa is beautiful and complex, and a place I'm grateful to visit, a place I'm not sure whether I'll ever go back to again, but never say never. So I guess for work, probably Central Africa, just to tell different stories and really to see a different part of the world, and and understand a different way of life. And then for pleasure, this is going to sound like the most cliche thing, but I'm a 3.5-year proud American immigrant, and for me, just exploring the United States and exploring my new home country is currently my favorite place to travel, and just an incredible privilege to be here and to be part of this country.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And the US is so big. There's so many different geographies, cultures across the country. There's a lot to see.
National parks, a lot of those as well. So yeah, I think for me that's my favorite place to explore personally. But yeah, there's a lot of places in the world, but I think with traveling the world, space makes it seem smaller because you can just access images and data and information around the world much, much faster. And B, the more you travel, the more you realize we're not actually that different. Different culture, we might seem different, and cultures might seem different, but traveling the world makes the world both a bigger and a smaller place. Bigger in the sense that you realize there's so many more other places you want to see, but smaller in the sense that you realize we're not too dissimilar. We might be divided by borders and language and beliefs, but I guess travel in the same way is the closest many people get to space right now in terms of a sense of perspective. And don't get me wrong, to travel is a privilege, but so is to go to space.
Yeah. Speaking of, would you go to space? Would you, if the opportunity was presented to maybe go on a Blue Origin flight, Virgin Galactic, or Crew Dragon, would you go?
Do I have to list in preference, or do
No, you don't have to list preference.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's there's risk involved,
right?
But to see the Earth, to see something that so few humans have had, but also to go back to different communities, because most astronauts have been Americans or Russians. There's more Chinese now, but to go back to different countries, to inspire other nations, to inspire my own home country that it's possible. So it's a space mission. Often from non-spacefaring nations is bigger than the person going themselves. It's about opening up access to space for many, many more countries and cultures. So yes, I think I would go. And it just reminded me when I wrote my book, The Space Race, we did, and it was a kids' book for the Apollo 50th anniversary. But I did this big map of the world with countries with space assets, and you can color in most of the map. And that's just how much space has changed in terms of space assets, in terms of access to satellites and stuff like that. And I guess the next step up from that is seeing more people from different nations going to space, and different communities and different cultures, and really opening up space for all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just in the past few days, some news that's been in the space industry, I don't want to say the wrong launcher. But ISAR Aerospace, the German launch company, is getting very close to doing their first launch from Norway. I think the S-range, or is that in Sweden?
There's Kuru spaceport in Sweden.
Yes. Yes, it's in Sweden. I believe so. And GovMilSpace in Australia is also getting close to doing the first orbital attempt from Australia. So those are, we didn't know if we would see those milestones last year. A number of these small launch companies have been working toward that milestone, but it's very, very cool to see launch expanding. All right, then, so we're getting close to satellite. What are you most excited about for the show this year?
Well, I've already mentioned your panel, and also there's a panel on generative AI as well, and just kind of like how AI and new technology can actually benefit processing space data and stuff like that, and benefit life here on Earth. I'm also excited for the keynotes, the fireside chats with Jeff and the CEO of SES, the GovMilSpace breakfast keynote, and also the fireside chat I'm doing with Dan Goldberg, who of course is the CEO and president of Telsa. I'm super excited for those. I'm excited for GovMilSpace because I think this is a really exciting opportunity and has come from a lot of work from all of the satellite team in terms of like getting the best people together from government, from military, from industry to actually come together and have real worthy conversations and have the right people in the right place at the right time in the right room to actually move forward the needle and move forward the industry. So I'm excited for that. And then I'm just excited for the networking opportunities. And as I mentioned earlier in this conversation, this banner of driving business and inspiring innovation, what that actually means for the industry, that it's no longer just about space for space, but it's about space for Earth. It's about space for providing opportunities, getting more ideas, more payloads into space, and also benefiting life here on Earth. So I'm excited for a lot of things. I'd say those, your panel, the keynotes, the fireside chats, GovMilSpace, and then just the overall networking. The theme of the show would be my top. I'd say 3.5, I think it is. But and also just getting to experience this conference for the first time in DC. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's coming for the first time.
No, not at all. We always have a large percentage of new attendees, so there will be a lot of people. In terms of networking opportunities, I was just going to say for our listeners, if you're at the show via satellite, we're having a happy hour on Wednesday at 4:00. So I'd love for people to stop by, meet me and Mark, and say hi there. Sarah, I know you're going to bring an awesome energy to the show. I'm super excited to meet you, and
I'm excited to meet you too.
And thank you so much. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's listened to this.